Andrew Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to join in the congratulations to my honourable friend for West Bromwich West and colleagues for securing this important debate. He made some very powerful points, as have all the subsequent speakers, and it's good to see the measure of cross-party agreement which is emerging that the students have to be removed from the immigration target as far as domestic policy is concerned. Now, with 2 universities and numerous independent colleges in Oxford East, my constituents are amongst those hardest hit by the ill-judged policies on student visas and immigration which this government has brought in. Those have inflicted serious damage on the reputation and attractiveness of the UK and on the economic and cultural contribution which overseas students and those who teach them make to our country. The government's policies in this area, actually, Mr Deputy Speaker, amount to a perverse and stupid act of economic self-sabotage, because they hit a part of our economy where Britain in general, and Oxford in particular, have a strong global strategic competitive advantage. And I have to say that there is a logical contradiction in the government protesting that there's no cap on student numbers and yet persisting in including student numbers within their overall target of reducing net immigration to tens rather than hundreds of thousands. And it has the effect that because they find it so difficult to control other areas of immigration, including illegal immigration, there's a continual downward pressure as far as students are concerned. Now, we're fortunate in Oxford, Mr Deputy Speaker, to have many high-quality institutions. And I was just thinking about how it shows how ludicrous this policy is if we imagine it being applied to another area, for example, to our mini plant and to manufacturing as opposed to educational exports. Imagine a government with an overall limit on manufacturing exports because it doesn't want too many foreigners getting their hands on our goods. And then as the number of BMW Minis being exported falls because overseas dealers worry that they won't be able to fulfil orders, the Prime Minister flies out to the Far East and attempts to reassure people that whilst he's determined to bring down net manufacturing exports, there is no cap on the export of Minis. Such a policy would be balmy, way beyond swivel-eyed, and yet economically, it's exactly what the cuts in overseas students amount to. Now, yes, happy to give way to
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a really, really powerful speech. But does he agree with me that it's simply no good, the Prime Minister, having these visits overseas to supposedly increase our exports, when one of our very, very best exports in terms of HE is being undermined by the government's policy?
Well, indeed, actually, and the very fact that the Prime Minister felt he had to go out there and say that was actually tacit acknowledgement of the damage to UK's reputation which this policy has done. Happy to give way.
It's my understanding that applications from overseas students for the University of Oxford have gone up by some 22%. So isn't what the Honourable Gentleman is saying really mischaracterising what our objective is with this policy, which is to actually cut down on the bogus student applications, but to still allow our higher education sector to thrive?
The problem is, in answer to that not enough is being done to encourage it to thrive. And as was pointed out earlier, Universities UK take issue with some of these figures, but however you characterise them, the position at the moment is pretty flat. And for a global market that is expanding so quickly, that simply isn't good enough. Now, of course, the closure of visa factories masquerading as colleges is a good thing, not least because of the impacts of my honourable friend for Islington pointed out on the applicants themselves, as well as the damage it did to the reputation of UK education, as well as undermining legitimate immigration control. But it's important to understand that the way the government and the UK and the UKBA have gone about its wider changes have hit legitimate universities and colleges, which, as everyone has said, are an enormously important source of intellectual capital, jobs, prosperity both now and for the future, worth tens of billions of pounds. Now, the Honourable Lady referred to Oxford University, and in their briefing for this debate, they pointed out, and I quote, The cumulative and frequent changes to Tier 4 policy guidance over the last few years have created increased anxiety amongst our current and prospective student body, especially when some of the rule changes were applied retrospectively. And they go on to say, we have received feedback and comments from prospective students and institutions overseas about the numerous UK BA rule changes over the last few years that indicate it may well be a determining factor in students choosing to study elsewhere. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Government has to understand that these damaging effects are impacting at a time of intense international competition, especially for the highest calibre of undergraduates, postgraduates and researchers, at a time also when the funding shortfall for postgraduates, as compared especially with the United States, makes it an increasing challenge to recruit and retain the best. So Oxford University makes clear that it supports the recommendations of the Select Committee reports referred to in this motion. But let us also in this debate recognise that the damaging impact of government policy hasn't been confined to universities and university students. Indeed, the effects have been even more serious for independent colleges, whose educational and economic contribution rarely gets the credit it deserves, and indeed seems to be totally ignored by this government. It's deeply ironical that a government which has an ideological obsession about liberating schools for home students from state control is hammering the private colleges which support thousands of jobs and billions of pounds of overseas earnings. I'm happy to give way.
Permitted to intervene. Deputy Speaker is very kind. I do, as a fellow Oxford MP, the honourable gentleman will know that I share some of his concerns about student reforms, but I do think that it's important that the debate continues on factual information. And the 22% quoted by my honourable friend is in fact based on data from the HESA, which is the data which is used in both the Universities UK and the Million Plus briefings, which I think is important to be read into the record. But the points which he was just making are important because the falls which have been seen have been amongst the FE college and the private college sector. And the main concerns which have come from the university has actually been about the frequent changes in student visas, and that is much more of a difficulty for both students and the university. And perhaps those are issues which you might like to comment on, as those are the main challenges actually faced by the university students.
I'll take that, Mr Deputy Speaker, as warm and strong support for the points I've already made about the damage which the changes to the visa regime have impacted. Now, in this, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Government's denying independent colleges a level playing field and disadvantaging them in a number of respects. These include the 2011 two-year cap, yes, cap on their international student numbers, all the uncertainties of the twice-yearly highly trusted sponsor renewal application they have to go through, the denial of part-time work for students either in term time or holidays, their students' exclusion from the new post-study work schemes for PhD and MBA graduates, and the fact that unlike university students, PhD students at independent colleges are not exempt from Tier 4's 5-year time limit, so they can't do a first degree in the UK before their PhD. And it is little surprise then, Mr Deputy Speaker, that international student enrolments on higher education courses at independent colleges fell by 70%, yes, 70%, between 2011 and 2012, with a fall of 46% in college sector visas for the year ending March 2013. This has destroyed tens, possibly hundreds of college businesses and cost thousands of jobs, as well as losing income to families accommodating students and the local businesses and communities within which they spend their money. So, Mr Speaker, I very strongly support the motion before us. I hope the Government will listen to all these select committees of this House which have come to the same view on this question and take international students out of the migration statistics which it uses to steer UK immigration policy. I hope ministers will revisit and remove the unfair penalties which they've imposed on the independent colleges and work in partnership with them to develop longer-term, highly trusted accreditation and to promote the contribution those colleges make. And I urge the government more generally to look further and positively at what can be done to encourage, not discourage, overseas students at all levels who want to come here, because this invigorates universities and other educational institutions, generates a lot of overseas earnings, jobs and economic demand, which people here desperately need. And what's more, it would rebuild Britain's reputation in the world as somewhere which welcomes international students and researchers and recognises their enormous potential contribution to our culture and economy, which, let's remember, is to the benefit of all.